Hey everyone, how's it going? Thanks so much for tuning in. Today we're going to have some fun and dive further into the 62 GMC C1000. If you haven't seen the first video I made on this truck, I put a link to it down in the description below. This is a really cool truck, being that it still has its original 305 cubic inch V6. Yes, this is a 5-liter V6. And at the time, even though GMC was an independent division of General Motors and much of the body and chassis was shared with the Chevrolet counterpart, GMC had its own unique line of engines. This was the smallest engine they had at the time, believe it or not. It made 160 horsepower at, I believe, 3,800 RPM and 280 pound-feet of torque at 1,600 RPM. So this thing was really designed to work and pull and haul, and it's really just a fascinating engine. I'm actually going a little further down the rabbit hole and pulling the motor to do a general refreshing and restore the engine bay a little bit more thoroughly. And I thought this would be an awesome time to talk about many of the cool engineering features of this engine and basically what made it special. This is one heavy-duty sucker. It actually weighs more than a Chevy 454 big block V8, if that puts anything into perspective. So pulling this thing out is going to be interesting, to say the least. This motor was actually one of the first V6 motors produced by an American company. It was a purpose-built truck motor designed for durability, dependability, ease of maintenance, and low cost when it comes to, long-term ownership. There are 0 performance parts available for this engine unless you go a more custom route. What you see is what you get. Thankfully, you can still buy a lot of parts for this motor. I just ordered a bunch of stuff from O'Reilly Auto Parts, so when I'm, getting into all of this, I can do a lot of the basic stuff like gaskets, time and chain, oil pump, and all of that good stuff. So, without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into this thing. This right here is a classic example of not being able to let well enough alone. Like I talked about in the last video, this was going to be a simple wiring job and just getting it roadworthy, but now we've gone down the restoration route, which, truth be told, I blame my wife for that. She loves the truck, but I also love that she loves the truck, so we're gonna do whatever we can to get this thing fixed up right to where we can just enjoy it for what it is and maybe even put it to good use. But what's really cool about doing all of this is that I can actually give you guys a little bit more of a deep dive into this engine. Once we get it out, we'll be able to flip it over, check the bottom end out and all of that, so it's gonna be fun. I've got a couple tables set up here for motor parts so far, so let me give you a quick show and tell on what you see here. Obviously, these are the valve covers. Very cool looking. They have the GMC logos embossed on top. We've got the valley plate for the center of the motor, distributor hold down, ignition coil. This is a coolant jacket that sits at the very front of the motor, separate from the actual intake manifold. It's a little yitsy little thing, but it sure is heavy. Again, cast iron, cast iron, cast iron, lots of cast iron. That's the thermostat neck, the mechanical fuel pump, carburetor, and the original points distributor. Now, I do plan on putting like a new cap and rotor and stuff on this, but I have done a little bit of research, and apparently you can put a Buick V6 HEI distributor, like, one from like sometime in the 1970s or whatever. You got to do a little bit of custom work, but like I said, there are no performance parts available for this engine, so it's pretty cool what some people have come up with to give better performance and a more reliable setup. This is not the original carburetor. The original one was also a 2-barrel, but this is a 2-barrel Holly, which is in perfect working order. We may even have it gone through carburetors. There are some really talented carburetor rebuilders out there that can rebuild these to accept modern fuels, so you don't run into vapor lock issues and all of that. So we'll see how that goes when we get a little closer to getting the truck running once again. On this other table so far, we've got the starter, the water pump pulley, the fan, the What in the world is that called? Crank pulley. Holy cow, I need to have some more coffee this morning apparently, but anyway, this is the front cover for the motor, the piece that covers all of that right there. This is also a very heavy piece. I wouldn't be surprised if this weighed about the same as a Chevy small block cylinder head. But the water pump bolts in right there, very simple. Mechanical fuel pump bolts right there. You've got coolant outlets, that's crank seal and stuff goes down there. This bolts all the way up the front of the motor. There's another bolt that holds it from the opposite side at the top. You've got 3 oil pan bolts at the bottom, and all of this had lock washers from the factory. I mean, it's just amazing how far they went to give just a rock solid setup here. I'll be able to show you the motor in greater depth once it's out of the truck, but just a couple fun facts. So like I talked about in the previous video when I was doing the oil change with Valvoline VR1, which is always my go-to for older engines like this, especially ones like this that have flat tappet camshafts. This heavy-duty oiling system built into this motor is pretty awesome. It can flow 14 gallons of oil per minute. The canister style oil filter setup is down there. Big cast iron housing. It's got the pressure switch and relief valve sitting on top. And I'll show you this too later. The camshaft actually sits in its own oil bath, so when you start the motor, it instantly lubricates. There's no valve scuffing. There's no unnecessary wear from sitting for a long time. It's just immediately oiled, and it's really cool. You can also, the motor can also flow up to 134 gallons of coolant per minute. The cooling system is absolutely massive compared to any engine of comparable size at the time. So I think I remember reading there's only no more than a 4-degree variance of coolant temperature across this whole motor, which is amazing. The valve train is pretty cool too. As you can see, this is a traditional pushrod operated engine with 2 valves per cylinder. What's really different about this setup is that you've got this hardened steel shaft that runs the length of the head and 5 brackets holding it in place. As the engine warms up and the valves expand, those brackets expand as well to ensure that the valves have proper clearances at all temperatures, which in the long run allows you to do less valve adjustments and allows the engine to run quieter. So it's just one of those little details that really set the GMC engine apart. You can also see here the spark plugs are inboard instead of outboard, so shorter wires, 0 chance of them getting burned on an exhaust manifold or anything like that, and they're also very easy to get to. Another pretty cool thing that you can see with the front cover off is the factory double roller timing chain, which is very stout. And as you got into the bigger displacement V6s, they even had a triple roller timing chain. Just very cool stuff.
Another reason why I'm pulling all of this out is I want to replace the mounts. I'm already this far, it'd be stupid not to, just because of how heavy everything is. The only downside to that is that you can't buy them anymore. They're obsolete and very hard to find, unfortunately. But I did come across a company called Steel Rubber. They're not too far from where I live, and they'll actually take the original mounts, revulcanize them, and make them like new, like you just ordered them from GM. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but it's definitely going to be worth it. But we've got to get everything out, to do that. So I'm going to come up with a game plan, and we'll get this thing pulled out.
So after fighting with this trans tunnel inspection cover for a bit, we're just about ready to pull the shifter plate out. Like I talked about in the last video, this truck originally came with a 3-speed on the column, but at some point in its past, somebody swapped in a 4-speed Muncie. Had to modify the trans tunnel to accommodate the trans because it's a little bit taller than the original one. And now we're just getting this shift plate out. We'll undo the rest of the motor mounts and we should be just about ready to pull this thing.
Now go up. Oh, take it out.
All right, I've got the engine mounted to an appropriate stand. This stand is actually really cool. Not only is it rated to 1,000 pounds, but it's gear driven. So being that this thing is as heavy as it is, if you tried to, use the handle to turn it over by hand like a regular one, you'd probably break your arm off. So this one, you just turn a crank and it rotates the engine, which is very nice. So at this moment, I'm going to take off just a couple last things, including the oil filter housing and the road draft tube. This thing, if you don't know what it is, as air passes underneath the truck when you're driving, it actually creates a suction force, pulling air through the tube out and underneath the truck. It's basically a part of the crankcase ventilation system. Now let's pop the oil pan off. Now this is really cool. I know you guys can't see like super in depth into there, but just taking a quick glance, it's just amazing how stout and thick everything is compared to like a small block Chevrolet. Compared to the 3 best-selling truck engines at the time, every aspect of this motor was beefed up. I mean, there's 4 piston rings per piston. You've got the biggest bearings in the segment. Just like the crankshaft and the connecting rods are some of the strongest that you can get at the time. It's just a really, really neat thing to see. Aside from this just being an older motor, it actually looks really nice on the inside, which definitely makes me feel a little bit better about just doing the service work, cleaning it up, and putting it back together. There's going to be a whole lot of prep work that needs to be done before I can put a fresh coat of paint on this motor, but it's going to be a very satisfying experience. You can even see the GMC logo on the oil pump. Well everyone, that's going to wrap it up for this video. I hope y'all enjoyed. Please don't forget to leave a like down below because it really helps the video a lot. And if you haven't subscribed already, consider doing so because of course there's always a lot more content where that came from. I'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.